Well, the mind is nowhere. I mean, there's not a place that you can say, this is where the mind is, the way you can say, this is where my brain is. But what we do know is that the brain is the medium for the mind. The brain is that through which we experience the mind. And the reason that we know that is things that happen to our brain affect our mind. I drink alcohol, a very physical substance. It has a very physical reaction on my blood. Therefore, a physical reaction on the connections in my brain. But my experience of my mind changes. Maybe I was feeling really stressed. Now I'm not so stressed. Maybe I was feeling more shy. Now I'm ready to dance with the world. Right? So that which we do that's very physical, that we know impacts the mind, ranging from alcohol and drugs to brain injuries, to literal injuries that we know. People get shot in the brain, and we've got 100 years worth of neuroscience history of knowing, oh, a lesion in this part of the brain. Oh, a stroke in that part of the brain. Oh, here's what it does. So we know that the brain is the seat of how we experience the mind. Recently, someone very, very close to us passed away from Alzheimer's. And it was fascinating because as we watched her disintegrate, the brain disintegrate, and I know from my personal neurological background where in the brain it is that Alzheimer's happens. I mean, we know it's the dendrites, we know it's the connections, we know exactly what's happening neurologically. We don't know why, but we know what is happening. And then what you get is a woman who used to be so loving and kind and generous. Now suddenly, angry, violent, hitting, not recognizing her own family members. And it actually really made me think. And this is now what I'm sharing with you is the outcome of a lot of personal introspection that I did, because I thought, God, love feels so deep. You said, okay, I know my heart. Well, what's the heart? The heart is love, right? So now let me challenge that a little bit. With a little bit of degeneration of the dendrites in your brain, that which you identify as the deepest love, where does it go? How does that love disintegrate with some connections between brain cells? I mean, right? Isn't our love deeper than that? Love lives here, not in my dendrites. I mean, am I that shallow? And what I've realized in thinking and actually talking to a lot of people over the years, because it really made me start to think. She was the first person I knew so closely to have this sort of illness. And with a background in neurology, I was fascinated by what is happening. Okay, I understand she can't remember things, but why does our love go? Where does our peace go? Where does our happiness go? Does that really just exist in our dendrites? And what I've realized is, it doesn't. No, of course, it's much deeper than that. And yet the brain is the medium for the experience of that. The same way the eyes are the medium for the experience of sight. Sight does not exist in my eyes. But if you pull out my eyes, I no longer can see. Similarly, I could have perfect eyes, but you could damage the occipital lobe of my brain, I still could no longer see. Now, sight is still there. The people I was seeing were still there. The world is still there, even though it's become dark to me. Where did that exist? Where did they exist? Okay, so we know the mind is deeper than the brain, but the brain is actually the seat of that. The brain is the medium through which we experience it. Now, why doesn't it let me sit still? Why is it negative? Well, first of all, it's not always negative. The positive stuff is actually just as distracting as the negatives. It's more enjoyably distracting. We'd much rather take a daydream back to a beautiful moment in our life, or into a fantasy of where we'd like to go. I mean, daydreaming is fun. But unfortunately, it is the opposite of meditation. And so while we may enjoy it, it's just as detrimental to being in the present as negativity. The mind tends to be negative, sadly, because we have such expectations. Children's minds are not negative. Children tend to be positive. They're happy, they're smiley. What makes them negative? They're hungry. They're tired. They've got a diaper full of poop. I mean, it's really basic stuff. Feed them, clean their diaper, and you've got a happy kid. Hold them, love them, you've got an extra happy kid. For us, what ends up happening is the mind starts to steal our happiness. And this is where it becomes negative, is as we grow, we develop this ego. And the ego is important because the ego distinguishes us from others. So the ego is the thing that when your mom says, ask before you take his truck, that's not yours. No, you can't have the cookies from your sister's plate. Those are hers. So we have to understand the distinction between mine and yours so that we can play nicely in the playground. But then the ego in that ends up, it takes that and it runs with it. So it begins with, her cookies, don't eat them. And it ends with, why does she get that? Why does she have this? Why does he get that? His truck is prettier than my truck. I want his red truck. I don't want my blue truck. And then we grow and it gets bigger. She has this house. He has that car. She has this job. He has this wife. And it becomes everything. And that which we needed to develop, to learn to play nicely in the playground, has become our greatest enemy, because it's always about you versus me, yours versus mine. Why is yours so much better than mine? Why do you get everything and I don't? Why do you have the shiny truck and I don't? You've got the cookies, I don't. And this is how. And of course, what the ego then does is it decides that there's some problem in the world. Or it decides there's a problem with us, depending on how we've been raised. We end up with one of two pathologies. Either I'm the worst, I don't deserve anything, or I deserve it, but the world isn't giving it to me. In either case, it's negativity. And they're actually they're not so different. They're two sides that many of us flip back and forth with. So it's, I deserve it, I'm bitter, I'm angry, the world isn't giving it to me, things aren't fair, it's not right, it shouldn't be like this, what about me? Into, oh my God, I can't believe I'm thinking like this, I'm the worst, I'm never going to meditate, I'll never be spiritual, even God doesn't like me. And it goes like this. The other thing that the mind does is it judges. And again, this comes from our culture. It's how we're raised. It's how we're raised. It's how our parents raise us. They don't mean to do it. It's how they are. We're raised, we judge. This is pretty, this is ugly, this is nice, that's not nice. This is what good girls do, this is what bad girls do. This is what good boys do, bad boys. We're constantly labeling, constantly judging. Mommy's pretty little girl. Mommy's bad girl. Everything is judgment. Everything is labels. And so we develop this habit, this sanskar of labeling things. And we carry it into our world. I'm beautiful, I'm ugly, I'm successful, I'm a failure, I'm worthy, I'm not worthy. And this is the stuff that occupies the mind because there is no end. With 7 billion people on the planet, there is no end to the number of those with whom you can compare yourself. There is no end to the judgments you can pass. There is no end to where some are so much better off. And then of course the guilt, because that comes in, oh my God, but these people are so, I can't believe I'm feeling badly about myself. What do I have to feel badly about? Oh my God, look at these kids. And then the guilt. And with all of it, I'm everywhere except here. I'm everywhere except here. Because the truth is, right here, in this breath, in this moment, I'm okay. I'm enough. It's enough. This breath is enough. This presence is enough. And that actually scares the ego. And that's where when you start meditating, sadly, the ego actually amps up what it does. Because that experience of enoughness is the greatest enemy to the ego. The ego needs scarcity, competition, negativity, judgment to live. And so love, surrender, acceptance, enoughness are the enemies of the ego. And so the minute that those of us who've been on, spiritual paths for a while, you begin and the ego just does, you go another step, the ego, and you always know that you're actually just taking another step when suddenly you're like, oh my God, I thought you and I were done. And out of the blue, here comes this ego in a new form. It's always a new form because it's very clever. Takes you a moment to recognize it. You're like, but I thought we finished this thing. And it comes up every time we start to get deeper and deeper in our spiritual paths. Every time we start to surrender more, experience our own enoughness more. Because that's the stuff that shrivels the ego. Remember, the ego was created out of know your place, separation. So connection, oneness. This is what shrivels the ego. And so this is where you may not notice your wandering mind so much until you sit to meditate. And it's not that it's not wandering other times, it is. If you start to pay attention, you'll notice you're sitting, even now, many of our minds are wandering. Sit in a conversation with someone, your mind is wandering. But it tends to pick up an increased frenzy in your meditation. So it's not the mind that's the enemy. And it's not even the ego that's the enemy by any means. It's just they need to understand that they're not in charge. You want to solve a math problem? You need your mind. That's what the mind does. You need to figure something out, sort something out, a difficulty, an issue. So much of that which we do in our work, we need our mind. We need to solve things, figure things out, be effective, be efficient. My intuitive heart has no idea how to make a spreadsheet. My mind knows how to do that. So we need it. But it's not supposed to be running the show. It's supposed to be a tool in our hands. And this is where meditation becomes so important. Is it enables us to get out of the clutches of the mind, the clutches of the ego, and to re-experience, I'm here. In a moment of not being run by my mind. And in this moment where I'm not being run by my mind, I'm enough. The moment is enough. And then we're able to string those moments together more and more and more and more.